Hi, this is Jackie Miller, host of Out of Crazy Town, your guide to divorcing a narcissist. I have one of my favorite people back on the show, Dr. Justine Weber, Doctor of Psychology. Dr. Justine joins me to talk about a very sensitive and overlooked form of abuse that happens in abusive marriages, sexual abuse. This is a topic that is often rife with shame for the victim and has a shroud of darkness and secrecy that often lets the perpetrator get away with their horrific behavior. Dr. Justine and I discuss this difficult topic and tell the stories we've encountered in an effort to spread awareness and give victims validation and support. I do caution against possible triggers as you listen, so please take care and thank you for listening. Hello, Dr. Justine Weber. Welcome to Out of Crazy Town, your guide to divorcing a narcissist, or I should say welcome back.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me again. I'm very excited.
I thought I would tell the audience something that we didn't say. You have been on the show one other time. And Justine and I actually met 20 years ago. And I won't get into all the details, but our husbands were very similar at the time. And I met your husband first, and that it was funny, right down to the companies they had and the names of their companies, which was even similar, which was so odd. But anyway, we met 20 years ago and then sporadically saw each other over the years and then hadn't seen each other all for 7 years and then recently reconnected. And it's amazing. So now here you are, a doctor of psychology. You also are a certified narcissistic abuse recovery coach. I am a coach in high conflict divorces and custody battles. And so it's just so interesting how our paths have kind of merged.
Yes, very similar paths. I know. It's just pretty wild how things like that happen in life where, it's like you were meant to reconnect, with this different version.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been so great because you are a therapist with the specialties that you do, just helping people recover from narcissistic abuse. You're a trauma-informed practitioner, which is great because I know a lot of people look for that. And so I really find you such a valuable lifeline for me hotline to pick up and call. And so whenever you and I get on a subject and we can talk and talk and talk, and where this is all leading is I'm leading up to this episode, which is the naked truth about sexual abuse in marriage. You and I stumbled on this topic and we both decided we really needed to talk about it with my audience because it does not get discussed enough and there's so much shame around it. And so I really appreciate you coming on to discuss this.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm really glad that you agreed with my perspective. I really have not found too much content out there, YouTube videos or information in general, more specifically about this narrow topic, not just coercive control, but the sexual abuse in a narcissistic relationship or marriage. There's just not a lot of information, and I don't know why. Well, I know why, because it's uncomfortable. There's so much shame. But I don't know why more professionals or coaches or psychologists are not, or podcasts are not openly talking about this. It is so much more common than people would think. There's just so much shame that is intertwined, humiliation, embarrassment. People don't want to talk about it. And I really do understand. I have yet to meet a lady who recognized during the relationship or the marriage that it was abuse. Mm-hmm. It's always after, once they've left, maybe they thought it might, they were, they just weren't sure. But it really isn't until after they leave, when they start healing and they're disconnected, from the partner, when they're able to kind of see things a bit more clearly and kind of unravel of all of this, because it is so confusing. I know we talked about that on the podcast. Everything is so confusing.
Everything is so confusing. And we're going to talk about some examples on the show today because as you and I discussed, we think it's important because it's not discussed for any victims of this to connect and just have that validation of it's not just me. Oh my gosh, this is a thing, or that, yes, that is happening or did happen, and just shed light on it and give this community the validation and support. And so I just kind of want to warn people, not only just about the content of what we might talk about in the examples, kind of the trigger warning around it. And that's what women that have shared stories with me about this it's kind of the trigger. So I just kind of want to give warning about that. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about the examples.
Yeah, so I just wanted to preface, I'm, obviously a psychologist, and confidentiality is still 100% honored with anybody I've ever worked with. Even if there's aspects where it's like, oh, that sounds similar, it's not. I
Yep.
assure you. Anyways, confidentiality is absolutely still honored. So I just wanted to.
For both of us, extremely number one importance for both of us. Thank you for saying that. My last episode, I had Dr. Christine Cochiola on talking about coercive control. And one of the things that you and I discussed is the sexual abuse in the relationship or the marriage, how it's coercive. I want to get your feedback, expertise, specifically around how perpetrators are using the sexual abuse as coercive control.
To kind of break this down a bit for your listeners to begin to find truth or clarity in this, because it is so confusing, I think it might be a little bit better to kind of peel away and break this down in sections to be able to understand, okay, what is this? Why? How can I begin to determine if you're still in the relationship or maybe you've left? What kind of truth can you find to begin to piece this together, because it is so confusing.
Awesome.
So, very generally, coercive control, sexual abuse is anything that is unwanted. Now, that is very general, and it might seem very simple for people. Well, it's not, to be able to answer that if something is unwanted or not. And so I think a way that you can begin to find truth and clarity is begin to break it down with the abuser. What is their motive, goal? What is their intent with sex? Is it dominating? Is it controlling? Is it manipulating? Is it, about power, about validating them, intimidation? What sorts of intent and motive do they have? Then what types of strategies do they use? Because again, unwanted, it's not physical force. It's, everything else. And so this is why it's so confusing, why the coercive control is so difficult to really point out, because it's not physical force. It's everything else.
I do have an example of that where I have heard a couple of times he was so angry all the time, come home in a rage and, rage at me, rage at the kids. And I sort of realized, like, maybe if I had sex with him, it would calm him down so that he wouldn't be so verbally and mentally abusive towards us. And so there you have a situation where he could say, you asked for it, you initiated it. A woman is now in a position where she's having to have sex with somebody who's verbally abusive. No, she doesn't want to. No, but she's doing it to try to save herself and her children from further verbal abuse.
So what you're talking about there is the fawning response. So that's a trauma response.
Okay.
The 4Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
Okay.
The fawning response is, Peter Walker talks a lot about, the fawning response, and it's very common in narcissistic relationships and with children. Children oftentimes take on the role of fawning. Why? Because they want to avoid, because they want to, keep the peace. And so for a spouse, it's like, what is your intention? So going back to the original question, it's like, what is your intention? This is where you can find the truth. Like, this is like the cognitive dissonance where you have two completely polar opposite beliefs or ideas. Like, okay, I don't want to have sex. I don't really want to, but I initiated. It's like that would leave anybody very confused, ridden with self-doubt and blame, and which is what they want. That's what they want, because that's where their control is. And so the fawning response, it's like, okay, well, this is the people pleaser, and so why are you initiating? Why are you saying yes? To avoid conflict, to avoid things getting worse? Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from, this place of just wanting to keep the peace? And if you're not sure, maybe write it down. Sometimes if we just write things down, we're able to kind of find more truth.
I love that.
in situations where everything is so confusing.
Great
And so their
suggestion.
strategies a lot of times are like they'll use guilt, or they'll use threats. None of it's physical. It's all kind of in the gray area. So they'll use threats of, like, some examples I've heard is, if you don't have sex with me, or if you don't do this, I'm going to get it elsewhere.
Yes.
Or,
Big
they'll
one.
use, intimidation, or will shame you. They'll use aggression, you're
Yes.
just so scared.
Yes. And in that same thread with the manipulation, name calling, you're such a prude now. You are asexual. You are, just being demeaning to your body and who you are as a woman. And no man could live like this. Every other husband's wife does this XYZ. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's, blaming you, devaluing you, degrading, contempt. And, there's more self-doubt, blame, and then you want to prove, this goes back to the fawning, like, you just want to appease him and keep the peace. And by the way, fawn is also this trauma response where we're constantly trying to seek, it's an attachment, response, and we're constantly trying to seek safety and connection. And so this kind of taps into the trauma bonding, where it's like, we're social beings. We need to feel safe. We have to feel safe. We're constantly searching it. And so fawning is a way to seek safety and to avoid conflict and to try to find connection, even though the one that you're connecting with is not safe. So it's like you want them, but then you don't. You feel like something's off and, bad, but then you say yes, or maybe you initiate. I mean, just all of it is just so confusing, and it's so hard to find truth. But you're right, these strategies, all this manipulation of, and they're so savvy at knowing exactly what to say to you.
Oh yeah.
To get the response that they want, for you to do what they want. So you're right, just degrading you, or nobody would ever want to have sex with you. I can't believe, you gained weight, you look disgusting. An example of that, they were married for, I don't know, a long time. I think it was maybe about 14 years, 15 years. He never really ever performed oral sex. And she had asked a few times, and it was just always like, that's gross and all of that. So anyways, apparently it happened 2 times during the marriage. What did he do? He, she'd lay down on, the bed. He poured Listerine all over her private area.
Wow.
Of course it was like burning.
Yeah.
And what did he say? Oh, this is so disgusting. You smell, this is so gross. I can't believe you're making me do this. So of course, who in the world would ever ask again, with that sort of just degrading, dehumanizing her, and I was like, wow, how did you feel? Of course, when it was happening, she was numb, but, when she was able to, and this is why it's so important to find the vocabulary to give a voice to these experiences that have been so shamed and nobody wants to talk about it. Secrecy and hiding and not talking about something and finding words just fuels more shame and humiliation and embarrassment, and keeps us stuck and makes us feel worse, like we're not deserving of it. And so the more we put words and vocabulary to our stories, so we ended up unpacking this of how she felt. And this is another way how we can peel away and find truth during relationships like this. How do I feel? Okay. She ended up describing, she felt dirty, she felt disgusting, and she said she felt cheap. That makes sense to me. It's horrific.
Absolutely.
Horrific. And this is her husband. They had children. I mean, it's just disgusting.
It is. It is. I mean, how degrading, how demoralizing. I just have the chills from that story. And thank you for sharing it, because people have no idea what goes on in a marriage, right? And you say you've been married the 14, 16 years, like you said, and you've never mentioned any of this to your best friends, to your sisters. And now what do you do? And so, I'm just here with you, also encouraging women to talk with their therapist, bring up these specific topics. I'm sure you're talking with them about a million other things going on in your marriage, but that gets put way deep in the recesses of your mind because it's so hard to deal with. It's so emotional once you try to verbalize it.
It can also be, a little bit re-traumatizing as you retell the stories, but it's so important to get help and support if this is happening.
And, I also want to suggest, it's important to talk to people that, are going to be understanding and supportive, but anybody who does discuss anything like this, you should never say, why don't you leave? Or why don't you say no? Or why don't you, tell him this, or whatever. No, do not ever say that. That is a terrible thing to ever say to somebody who is in this sort of situation. I mean, it really is more traumatizing and gaslighting, like putting them to blame. Like,
yes,
it's so easy. Just pack up and leave, or just say no if, he's too aggressive, or,
yep.
It's not so easy.
No, it's not so easy. So thank you. So if someone comes to you, please be mindful that you don't say any of those things. And so, talk to a professional if you need to. And actually, even on that note, I was going to mention it at the end, but I'll mention it now. There is a national sexual assault hotline, and it is 1-800-656-HOPE HOPE. And so, call a hotline, even if you need to talk to somebody who knows exactly what's going on, just to start the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to give you, here's the 3 things to do if, you listen to this podcast and you realize, wow, this is sexual abuse, and I've been married for, 18 years. Now what? Step 1, this. Step 2, it just, there's not a one size fits all. And these situations, there's a reason why we developed this trauma response of fawning, of saying yes, of being a people pleaser. It's a survival technique. It's a survival. It's fear-based. You're trying to keep the peace out of fear and avoiding of what could happen if you don't. And so we do it for a reason. It goes back to survival. It probably is keeping you safer in that situation. And so it's not so easy to say, if you're in the marriage and this has been the dynamic of you saying yes or initiating, he dominates, control, manipulates, degrades you, and then out of nowhere you start saying no, that could actually put you in a really very dangerous situation. So really, you have to, work with a professional who is knowledgeable about this, and you can begin to create your own plan ongoing of what would make sense in a safe way. Maybe setting boundaries is not an option. I get that. What could happen? There was this woman, said to me that when they were separated, and he would come over and pick up the kids or drop them off, and he would say, look, if you don't have sex with me, then I'm going to sexually abuse, our daughter. And so this went on with every pickup and drop off where she had to do things. I mean, it was just horrific. So again, it's like, it fosters safety, for either you or your children. So saying yes or initiating or being a pleaser, you're doing it for a reason. At the same time, is it a long-term solution? No, but it has to be handled in a really very delicate manner. And it's not a one size fits all. Every situation is just so different.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for sharing that example. It's just like when we hear, when the leaving of an abusive marriage is the most dangerous time. And that's sort of synonymous with that. It is you're trying to leave this situation that they've set up that's controlling, that's, abusive, and you're putting up boundaries, and that's escalates often, their behavior. It's very scary sometimes to do that. So yes, come up with a plan, begin to have the discussion to see if there's anything you can do, to get out of this situation.
Surround yourself around, friends and loved one that you trust, that are going to believe you and support you and not judge you, and really just be there as a support system, because that is helpful to kind of begin to build your strength and to, find your truth. Again, the more you talk about it and, finding the vocabulary and the words to tell your story, it becomes more, it just makes you feel like just more of your truth.
Right.
Otherwise it's like this secrecy, and it's hidden, and humiliation, and, fear. And it's so hard. It really is.
It
but
is.
This is so much more common than people really think.
It is. It's so much more common. And another thing I like to encourage people to do is to go ahead and research stuff. Like, the internet is our friend on this, and you can find, other stories, other resources that not only make you feel not alone in this, but, maybe you could figure out what somebody else did, or maybe you could just find out, what kind of support systems out there that you didn't realize before. And the reason I mentioned that is because I became, and really how this started is because I shared a story with you that I became aware of a woman who was in, a marriage that was quite long as well, and discovered that her husband had been drugging her and raping her and recording it over the years. And I can hardly control my emotion right now. I was so upset for her. And, and she'd been talking about verbal and emotional abuse in her marriage, but he's never been physically abusive to me. And on so many levels, to have this discovery was just shattering. And so I remember I brought up a conversation with you, and we just started talking more and more and more, but I got on the internet and started researching it and was shocked at how much it happens. I'm like, this is a thing. So again, every situation's so different, and every story is so gut-wrenching. Somebody out there understands, though, what you're going through. So I'm just a big advocate of getting out there and educating yourself and finding support.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I got chills when you were describing it. It absolutely just, my heart just aches when I, hear stories from other people. It just makes you connect with them in a really much deeper way, just that vulnerability of this kind of raw truth. It's so incredibly frightening and so scary and so sad and devastating. And you're right, the more that we talk about it and, share our experiences, this is really the only way that we'll be able to break through and be vulnerable and, begin to heal, and become whole. And this is all, again, with narcissism, they're entitled and controlling, and they manipulate, and they need constant validation, and they feel better about themselves when they're putting somebody else down and contempt. So it makes sense why this would play out in the bedroom. I mean, it makes, it's like with relationships, how they operate. Why would it be different in the bedroom, with a spouse, where they would be respectful or tell me about your needs or what do you want? So, it makes sense, I guess, logically why it would play out, all the time or the majority of the time, where there's no give and take, there's no, it's just all about them and this dominance and manipulating, control and validation, contempt, treating you like you are less than, like your needs don't matter. I mean, you essentially don't have any needs. I mean, that's the fawning. This woman I worked with, she was married for a really long time as well, and her husband was really into whipping her, and so he would use things like whips, belts, hairbrushes, and he would whip her all over to the point where she would have marks and bruises on her. And that's actually what would turn him on. I mean, this is like the marks on her, because, then it's about, oh, I own you, you are mine. And again, she would apparently ask for it, at times. And so talk about the confusion and the cognitive dissonance and the fawning, where it's like, okay, no, I don't like it. This is terrible. Who would ever want to sign up for this? And at the same time, I'm asking or initiating, and so this is just, at the core, so complicated, these two beliefs of, no, I don't want this. And at the same time, I'm saying yes. He would kind of use this like, oh, I know you wanted this, you asked for this, or it would kind of turn into this role play, maybe, the next day or something, he would see her bruises and it would, make some kind of degrading intimidation kind of like remarks like, oh, you want more of that. I know you want that, and so it's like, it's just so sad, what these women have to go through. And do you think these men are the ones who have any guilt or sadness or regret or remorse
Right.
or anything, or even accountability? Of
Right.
course not.
Right.
That's why these relationships are so, when you've left and you start unpacking all of this and you're like, oh my gosh, that's what this was. And you have to heal and make sense of that and push through your, shame on your own with professionals, hopefully.
Yeah.
You're never going to get that phone call or accountability from the abuser ever.
No.
This is another thing that is quite common is STDs. So this is another sign of, a lot of narcissists cheat. So they have
Yes.
sex with women, they come home, they give something to their wife. The wife goes to the husband, hey, I have chlamydia, herpes. What happens? It's her
You
fault.
were cheating.
She
What
did
have
it.
you been up to? Yep. I knew exactly
You're
the answer to
dirty.
that.
And, like where I haven't done anything, like, I blame it on her. It's
Yep.
her. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't have any symptoms. I have never had sex with anybody. You're an alcoholic and you get drunk all the time when you're at bars. So you must have gone in the bathroom and, had like, I can't believe this. You're cheating on me.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Where you're just sitting there.
And just
what
like
is
that,
happening here?
just like that, a cheating husband who there's very specific proof of now, you've got an STD, you are now explaining, no, I didn't. You're defending yourself. They
Yep.
turn it around like that to where you're trying to convince them it wasn't you. And they have in one fail swoop turned the whole conversation into you defending yourself when they've, so blatantly wrong, which, and we can apply that. They use that model in so many other situations in usually in relationships or marriage as well. But yes, with the sexual abuse, absolutely. And I knew the answer to that right away. Yes, it's your fault. You're out there doing something wrong, and back to the horrible story of, the woman that you were aware of that went through with the whipping. I know they're so manipulative too, in that they will gradually get their victims to that point to where the victim's like, how did I end up here? And again, back with the insults and the coercive control, it's, we're married, we need to spice things up. It kind of starts that way. And then why wouldn't you just at least try it? And then you're thinking in your head, if I'm a good wife, I guess I would just at least try it. And we have been married for, a few years. I guess maybe we should try some new things. And then next thing you know, it's this, and then they're introducing this, and then they're introducing that. And then you're like, how did I end up here? I don't like this. And now I'm in a position where I can't say no, like you said. And so I also just want to acknowledge the insidious, slow progression that they will often use to push boundaries, and use all these reasons and excuses why you're a bad person if you don't.
No, there's so many parallels with the relationship, the narcissistic cycle of the love bombing, then the devaluing, then the discard. This is like when they maybe cheat or, find a girlfriend and so forth. And that plays out as well in the bedroom with the same tactics, the same motives, the same response. And so at the beginning, it's probably like wonderful. I mean, I've heard of a lot of stories how the beginning of courtship of a relationship was, they were going on trips, having amazing sex. Again, these people are very savvy at knowing how to hook you, knowing exactly what to say and do at the beginning stage. Everything is just showering you with amazing sex, pleasurable, maybe it's all about you. And you think you've just met your Prince Charming. Oh my gosh, he's successful and he's brilliant and amazing in the bedroom. Like, you've gotten a 10. And then slowly it's like, are you wearing that? It looks like you've kind of gained a little bit of weight.
Yep.
Other women I've had sex with, like, they did this to me and it just really, really turned me on. And,
yes,
I want to be with you. And but, I really want to do this. And so it's just very like subtle, slowly pushing the boundaries of like, it develops and kind of switches to, this is like the funny, you want to please them.
Yep.
You want to validate them. You're trying to find safety, connection. And so it ends up all being about them. You literally give up your needs. Again, it's a survival. Why would you keep asking something or wanting something if it's never met? I mean, eventually you just stop doing it because it's never, babies do that, the whole cry it out method, eventually if the mom doesn't come back to them and pick them up, they'll eventually just begin to soothe themselves, because somebody else, a caregiver, is not going to be there to soothe them. And so you just stop asking. So you literally give up your needs, and, you kind of break down your identity, and you really lose perspective of like what you actually really do like or want, or what pleasures you, or, it just all becomes appeasing them.
Right. All about them. It just puts an exclamation point on it. That's exactly what it is. And speaking of, that being a sign of, coercive control and sexual abuse, I wanted to talk about a few others. For instance, if you only agree because you're afraid, and afraid could be of many different things. If he refuses to practice safe sex, now that's not using a condom, obviously. It is when it is being forced to do degrading, unwanted, unsafe sex. And that is what that is referring to. I've also heard of situations where they get a woman pregnant right away and to keep her in the relationship. And so just having sex strictly to trap you, or force, on the other hand, forcing like an abortion, and so putting you through that trauma intentionally. And then there's the withholding sex as punishment. That's also an example, because you're craving attention and affection and a connection with this person who's probably love bomb you. And now you're in the devalue stage, and they're pulling you off the pedestal, and now they withhold. I'm sure you've heard that.
That's the control piece of it. It's like you're not really wanting it, but then they're taking it away, or if you don't have sex with them, giving you the silent treatment and punishing you in that way, or if you don't do certain things sexually, it's like, out of fear, avoiding conflict of what could happen, the next day, it's like, okay, it's just going to be easier to do this and get it over with, to at least have a peaceful day, or at least hope to have a peaceful day, or not have the silent treatment. But it's all the control, manipulation. They're trying to dictate your behavior and actions without physical force. It's everything else. And I have just noticed that this is far more debilitating and damaging and difficult to clarify, because it's not physical. And so it's manipulation, the control, the, silent treatment. It just immediately puts you in this place of like, I'm bad. I did something bad. The thing about silent treatment that, because I have heard that a lot from women. And the thing about silent treatment is, I really think that most narcissists probably have absolutely no idea why they're giving you the silent treatment. It's just like this way to just kind of this contempt, you're less than, I'm just going to ignore you. I mean, that's one of the worst experiences as a human being, is to feel like you actually are not even visible or matter, or, you're just invisible. I can't even speak to you. Because it's very common, not just with coercive control, sexual abuse, but during the relationship of just, you didn't do something or whatever. And, I would imagine if you went back, why are you ignoring me? They probably wouldn't even know. It's just.
Right. Couldn't give you a specific example, but they know inherently, you're, like you said, that it is the overall umbrella purpose is just to degrade you, demean you, and make you feel like you're nothing. You're not even worth a conversation. And so I completely agree with that. And silent treatment is also just, it's such a powerful way to control. And it doesn't sound like it would be, but it is an extremely powerful way to control. This is so interesting as well, because I have heard, gosh, this goes back to you saying how confusing it can be. Like, you say yes, but then it's something you don't want to do, or you can even ask for it. I'm also aware of a woman that was in a situation, and I've heard this actually multiple times, similar stories, where he will take Viagra. And so initially sex is consensual, and then have sex for hours. And it actually becomes where they'll say, I'm done, or no. It turns into rape mid act, because it started out consensual, and now they're either physically doing things to you that you don't want, and sometimes even say no to, or it's also a way to control and sexually assault you, is to continue the sex for extremely long periods of time, or do things during the act, even though it started out consensual, that you do not consent to. And there you have consensual sex turned to rape midstream.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really, really good point of how, it's like what is the intention? And, I'm going to back up too, again, even at the beginning, it's like, is it consensual? Just because you're saying yes, what is the motive for you saying yes? Are you trying to avoid? Are you trying to, appease him? Is it out of fear? Is it out of, intimidation? What is his motive for wanting sex? Dominating. I mean, that's a perfect example of domination, controlling, invalidating. You're just basically essentially there just to appease him, and you can't do anything about it. And then if you did say, hey, stop, I'm done, I've had enough, this is, painful, whatever, then it's going to be, oh, you always do this, we never have sex, calling you names, being critical, degrading your body. It's like they just want to control everything about you for their own power, control, image. You're right. I mean, it can be so confusing where you're like, that's the cognitive dissonance and, like the fawning piece where you're like, okay, well, I did say yes, or maybe you initiated at first.
Right.
Even more confusing because
right.
You're like, okay, well, I don't really want this, but I did initiate it. Those are two very conflicting beliefs or thoughts or, or values. The other thing I wanted to say is, a way to, again, going back to like initially, the conversation, how can I kind of peel away and try to find truth with these, experiences when everything is so confusing during this abuse? So his motive and intent and goal, but then also, how do you feel beforehand and after? Are you, just kind of like check in with yourself? And sometimes this is why journaling is so important, or writing things down, because when we just have this thought, like, how do I feel? We don't know. Sometimes, especially if there's disconnection, you're kind of numb, there's denial. We don't really know oftentimes. But so try to begin to create thoughts with experiences. Are you dreading having sex? Are you dreading this trip? Are you wanting it to be over? Are you beginning to get anxious about it? Fear of like, oh my gosh, when going on this trip, he's going to be wanting to have sex all the time. And, when he drinks or, does drugs, he maybe talks about other women or something, bringing somebody else in. That's another, piece of it too, of, oh, you want this, you like women, it's really going to turn me on, seeing you with, somebody else just really turns me on. You're my wife. We've been married for 20 years. This is what people do. Why are you so insecure about yourself? Why can't you just be more confident and secure in yourself by doing this and bringing somebody else in? And so it's like this, you're like, oh yeah, it's this vacation, but then you're like, okay, well, I know where this could lead and I don't know how bad it's going to get. And so it's kind of mixed with like dread, fear, anxiety. You just want it to be over.
Yeah.
So even if you're not able to identify the, emotional piece, that's okay. What are your thoughts? If you were to like talk to a friend, hey, I have this trip coming up, I'm dreading this, I just want this to be over. Like, that's important information to pay attention to. Like, okay, I'm dreading this. Healthy relationships, it should not feel like dread. It should not feel like fear or, anxiety. And again, going back to, okay, what is the motive, the intent of your partner? It should be really about connection. It should be about really being vulnerable together and, bringing you closer together. The whole dynamic, the whole foundation looks different on both ends, and then together too. The motives, intentions, how you feel, how he feels, what's the result? I would imagine in the coercive control abusive relationships, you're probably feeling really bad, or maybe a little bit angry at the person, maybe a mixture of disgust and anger or rage mixed with self-doubt, mixed with confusion, mixed with, oh, why don't I leave? No, I deserve better.
Oh my gosh. What you just said, I have to tell you, I was speaking with a group of women, and one thing I love to do is say, What does good look like? Because we also talk about too, like, is there hope in the future of a healthy relationship, of a real love, of a, after you've been through relationship, an abusive relationship. And so I had a woman say, I have a great example of what good looks like, because luckily I got to live it. In her marriage, there'd be a weekend where they're going to go away, and there was sexual abuse happening. And they'd be packing, and she wanted to be excited. She really wanted to, in her marriage, to like be excited that they were going to a really cool hotel for the weekend. She'd muster up and really say, like, be a good wife, be excited you're going away with your husband. And she'd be mid packing, and she'd come back to her suitcase, and there'd be all these toys laying on top of her suitcase that she didn't pack. And it was her signal, this is what you're doing this weekend. And she said her heart would just drop. And the whole trip, she was absolutely just trying not to even throw up, because she knew what was in store for her. So what she would do to cope is, the second they got to the hotel room, she would initiate it, and so to get it over with. And she would just be like, okay, this is what I'm in for. I have no way out. And so she's the one that would get it all out and go, let's go and get it over with. Yeah. And she said, you know what good looks like? My partner, of course, doesn't do anything like that now. Everything's loving, everything's consensual, everything's about connection, like you said. And she said, it took me a really long time, but now once in a while, I might grab a toy when we go away for the weekend. And he's like, oh, okay, awesome. What do you want to do? And right. When we talk about it, and it's fun. And is this okay? And does this feel good? If it doesn't, please tell me. And she said, and so now I would never thought in a million years that I would be happily trying to do that, but in a healthy relationship where it's all consensual and loving, you can explore. And I always say, your head needs to feel safe, your heart needs to feel safe, and your body needs to feel safe. Yes. So mentally, emotionally, and physically, you have to feel safe to be able to really enjoy sex.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it should be fun bringing, in new ideas or role play, but under this umbrella, this foundation of respect, safety, this balance of give and take, with the goal of connection, ultimately. Yeah. For the narcissist, they lack capacity to create that connection in relationships, emotionally, in any way. And it plays out in the bedroom too. They lack capacity. Safety is such a huge, huge topic, because how do you know that you don't feel safe in the relationship? I hear a lot of times when people are in the narcissistic relationships, like, why do you love this person? How do you know that? Well, it's just amazing. It's, so powerful. And it just, I don't know, we're so connected. And, it's like everything is just like vague. But then it's like, okay, once you're in a healthy relationship, there's more clarity, and you can identify clearly why it's safe and why you really feel connected. It's like,
that is such a good point.
There's respect. You feel safe in the relationship. If you want to experiment with something kinky,
I love that. I think that's a really powerful tool. Whatever's going on in the relationship, or if it's sexual abuse, like you said, they've been told you're the problem. And so when you're starting to question that and go, wait, maybe this is abuse. Maybe I'm not a loser, dirty, a prude, asexual, whatever. It's a really good thing to ask yourself. I think that's great. Yeah. And I want to touch on one other topic before we go. And there's so much shame around this, but I know it's something that happens. And it is when, say, a woman who's been abused cheats in the marriage. I don't want to talk about what that's about.
Thanks for bringing that up. It's important to keep in mind that in relationships like this, and I think all of your listeners would, agree, when you're in relationships like this, you end up doing things that really are not you. It's because, you're in this relationship, and it's almost like you're responding based on your environment. And so, for example, I have a close friend she's out of this relationship, thank God. She became so angry because, he was just like on drugs and cheating and all this sort of thing. My friend is the most like very spiritual, and I've never seen her even raise her voice ever. I mean, she's just calm, cool, and collect always. Wow. And she became so enraged that she took his iPad, and she threw it down the stairs at him. And of course, it like shattered, and she just started shaking after that. And she was just, I mean, it was like a different person. It was truly a different person. And she tried throwing it at him. Yeah. But it's like, when you look at this, it's like, this is not her. In any other environment, she would never act like that. She would
Yeah.
never respond in that way. So for victims, they are in these dynamics and they're reacting and they're responding out of fear, out of terror, out of rage, out of anxiety, out of frustration because of all of this abuse and this environment. And if you've been with them for a long time and have children, it's complicated. So going back to cheating, I just want to offer, some words that if women do reach the point in a marriage like this where they cheat, that does not make you a bad person. There's a difference between if this is a pattern versus you're responding based on an environment that is incredibly empty. You're scared, you feel alone, you don't have the connection, there's no love. And so being in a marriage for a really long time under these dynamics, it just makes you feel hollow inside, mixed with fear, self-blame, confusion, anxiety, especially if you're still having sex with him under these conditions of like anger, confusion, shame, self-doubt, blame. So I think, part of healing, because there's so much blame, self-doubt, humiliation of like, wow, I'm a cheater. I'm a terrible person. I am not loyal. It's a big stigma, like cheater. Well, when you peel it away, again, going back to the intent, the motive, why did you do it? Were you just so desperately looking for any connection because you were not getting it? Like, I understand that. I get that.
Yeah.
And part of the healing is really forgiving yourself, acceptance, radical acceptance. Dr. Romney talks about that, how there can be multiple truths. Yes, I cheated. I was unfaithful in my marriage, and I'm not a bad person. So many women are ridden for such a long time of blame, humiliation. They don't want to talk about it. What woman wants to go out there and be like, hey, I cheated during my marriage? I mean, it's humiliating. It's embarrassing. There's shame. Right. I get it.
And then the fear too is that all the focus goes on that instead of what's really going on in the marriage. And exactly. God forbid the abuser finds out. They could be cheating every single day of your marriage, and you get caught once. Oh my gosh. They make that the theme for the rest of your life if they can. They find that one thing. I mean, they honestly, they feel like they stumbled on a gold mine. And I've just heard that story over and over. And you're already this really good person that would normally never do this. And then now, oh my Lord,
talk about smear campaigns, I mean, this gives them like really like, juicy gossip, just exaggerate, embellish. I was married to a cheater. She cheated on me the entire marriage. But you're right. People are going to focus on that because there is this stigma, with women, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It just is looked down upon worse than men. When men do, it's like, oh, well, most husbands do, especially narcissists.
Well, it's like, guys need it. I bet they weren't having sex. I mean, that's like the go-to response to a guy cheating. Well, guys need it. They must not be having sex. That statement is saying it's his wife's fault that she cheated.
It's obviously his wife's fault. Everything is, no matter what you come to them with, it's always going to be your fault. They're just, very savvy at, shift blaming and placing it on you.
Yeah. But that, that's largely a large part of society's response to it. You're right. And so, the double standard has, been around for centuries and will continue, unfortunately, for at least a while longer. Dr. Justine Weber, thank you for coming on to talk about this very sensitive subject that is not discussed, and we need to talk about it more. And so I really appreciate it. It's a hard conversation to have. I hope women are finding validation from listening to this and, can find some sort of support if they don't have it now. Again, the National Sexual Assault Hotline is 800-656-HOPE. And you guys can also find Dr. Justine Weber on Instagram at Dr. Justine Weber altogether, JustineWeber. And then you're also on TikTok. I love your TikToks. Those are all really great, but I just really appreciate you coming on to talk about this.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And I agree. I feel very, I was excited for this podcast because it's so meaningful and really deserves a conversation. So I really hope that women get out there and connect, join some type of a group, just something, start talking.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you again. And you and I will talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.